Hello there! In Acts chapter 8, the Apostle Philip tells the good news of Jesus Christ to an Ethiopian eunuch. The man joyfully accepted baptism from Philip and brought his new faith back to the Ethiopian court. He thereby began the legacy of African Christianity that continues to this day, a vibrant and growing family of faith with ancient roots and fascinating history. Although the Bible does not name this man, tradition gives his name as Simeon Bakos. Join us as we explore the world of ancient African Christianity that he originated. Join us as we follow along in Simeon's wake. The Forerunners faithful, the Mandeans. Today we have a special treat. Today we are going to explore one of the least studied but longest lasting of all the so-called Gnostic traditions. This is the tradition of Mandeanism. Now, anytime you are hearing about a brand new sect that somebody is calling Gnostic, you should ask a few questions. One of those questions is, why is this person calling this group Gnostic? Now, this is particularly interesting in the case of the Mandeans because they are so different from the other sects that we've been studying. The Mandeans' primary language is not Greek. In fact, they have their own language called Mandaic, which is a variant of Eastern Aramaic. Aramaic, by the way, is basically the form that most Semitic languages take in the first century. So, for example, we don't think of Jesus speaking Hebrew necessarily because we call that Hebrew language Aramaic. It's part of that Aramaic language group. So the Mandeans are speaking basically a variant of the same language that Christ spoke. Now, because they don't speak Greek, you'll never hear the word gnosis escape their lips, and they don't talk about the emanations of the aeons at all. So why call them Gnostic? Well, long story short, because the root word for Mandean is manda, which happens to be the same as gnosis in Greek. And while they do speak a different language, Mandeans do make a strong distinction between the first life, that's their favorite name for the ultimate first principle, and the beings that emanate from that first life and accidentally create the world without really consulting the first life. In other words, there are enough similarities between these Eastern Aramaic believers and their Greek-speaking Gnostic cousins among the Sethians and Valentinians that most scholars apply a Gnostic label. Okay, that's question number one you should ask. Here is question number two. Actually, it's more like a series of questions. Have you ever noticed that the baptism narratives in the four Gospels get progressively more uncomfortable with John the Baptist? In Mark, widely assumed to be the first Gospel written, it simply states that John was baptizing and announced one was coming who would be more powerful than him. Jesus shows up, gets baptized, and everybody moves on with their lives. Simple. Then we get to Matthew, which is later than Mark and probably uses Mark as a source. Matthew adds a line in which John is real uncomfortable with baptizing Jesus. In fact, he says, "I need to be baptized by you, Jesus, and yet you're coming to me to get baptized?" Jesus replies that it is, quote, "fitting for all righteousness to be fulfilled," which is basically a spiritual way of saying, look, just roll with it, man, it's for the best. And then the scene basically plays out the same way as it did in Mark. Then we get to Luke, which is maybe a hair later than Matthew, and Luke doesn't even mention that John baptized Jesus. He just says Jesus was baptized. Passive voice, doesn't even mention John at all. And then John, the last of the Gospels to be written, does the same thing as Luke. Isn't that odd? Why do the Gospels show this persistent pattern of downplaying John the Baptist more and more as time goes on? Have you ever asked these questions? Have they kept you up at night? No? Well, then that means you are not a New Testament scholar. Congratulations on your excellent life choices. Because New Testament scholars have wondered about all of these questions. Repeatedly. Obsessively. In punishingly intricate detail. And in their research, they have realized that there were probably some people who questioned whether John the Baptist was superior to Jesus. After all, John was older, and he baptized Jesus, which indicated his superior position in the religious hierarchy. So why wouldn't John be the teacher? and Jesus the disciple. And in fact, some scholars will tell you that's exactly what happened. It's probable that Jesus was a disciple of John for a while before he launched his own ministry. The Mandeans would agree with those scholars. In fact, they would take it a step further. For the Mandeans, John the Baptist was the last and greatest of all the prophets of the Bible, beginning with Adam. Jesus, by contrast, began as a follower of John, but became an apostate by teaching his own doctrines. This, by the way, is another fascinating difference between Mandeans and other Gnostic sects. The Sethians and the Valentinians, in one way or another, really do see Jesus as the ultimate exemplar of the faith. Of course, the Sethians have their own sort of crossover event where Jesus is actually Seth, who's actually kind of an eon himself, but ultimately, they're going to refer back to Jesus as a sort of gold standard of the faith. Not so with the Mandeans. For them, Jesus was actually something of a corrupt person. One of the reasons I suspect the Mandeans haven't been studied as much as those other groups is because identity questions aren't as complex for them. Nobody's fighting over whether they are Christian or not. The Mandeans themselves would tell you they're not. No, they believe they hold to secret, mysterious, glorious doctrines that Jesus fell away from. So what are these great and mysterious doctrines? Well, they begin, as you can probably guess, with a creation story. In the beginning, there were two primordial elements. The ether, which is some kind of celestial star stuff that appears to be a bit watery, it can flow around, and Pyrrha, which is unfortunately a word we can't entirely translate. It might mean something like fruit or womb. The exact nature of Pyrrha was considered a mystery that even the prophets didn't know. There's one scripture in which John the Baptist asks to understand what Pyrrha is, and even offers his life in exchange for the knowledge. He doesn't get his wish, which is probably good for the history of religions, and also tells you something about how important this secret is. Whatever it means, Pyrrha is the sort of primordial womb, the life matrix from which all comes. It exists before you, before me, before the angels, even before God. Yep, that's right. Pyrrha precedes even the highest divinity. But not by long, because as soon as the story gets going, the King of Light, the first and greatest life, pops out. He is also known as Manna. Now, Manna is a name for that part of the human soul that is divine. The King of Light is usually referred to as Great Manna. We are just Manna. Well, not all of us, actually. Our Manna is the sort of center of our individual consciousness. Obviously, I'm not a practicing Mandean, but it seems like they have something in mind like this. Perhaps you have heard of mindfulness techniques, the sort of thing where you take a few deep breaths, close your eyes, focus on your breathing, and let your thoughts pass by as if they were clouds in the sky. That part of you that observes the thoughts, that's Manna. That's your center of consciousness. Great Manna, aka the King of Light, is the first being to exist. And every single being has a little bit of that Manna, that stamp of himself. So that's pretty neat, and no doubt the King of Light understood just how neat this all was at the moment of his birth. He then decided to procreate with his counterpart to create other spiritual beings. Where did this counterpart come from? Great question. I have no idea. Moving on, the King of Light decides to hole up in a cocoon for 999,000 myriads of years alone. As a certified introvert whose most prized possession is his Casper mattress, this is the most relatable part of this whole story to me. In Simeon's Wake is now brought to you by introversion. Everyone gets their energy from a different place. Some people get their energy from outside themselves, like extroverts and vampires. Other people get the energy for their transformation from inside themselves, like caterpillars becoming beautiful butterflies, and introverts. With introversion, you never need to be lonely again. Entertain yourself all by yourself for as long as you want. Never have to confront the melancholy burden of leaving your room. Develop a fascination with which kind of blankets you can be most comfy in while you're sipping your tea. Become chronically online as your only method of social interaction. Introversion. Home is the best place because it's where other people aren't. But eventually the King of Light emerges from his cocoon like the beautiful introvert butterfly he is, and immediately bursts forth into creating 369 new worlds. He also creates a number of spiritual beings. Of greatest consequence are 3 referred to as Second Life, Third Life, and Fourth Life. They do have, actual names, right? They don't just call these beings Second Life, Third Life, and Fourth Life, but the names are really confusing, and I'm butchering enough pronunciations in this episode as it is, so we're going to stick to calling them those. The most important one for the story of creation is Fourth Life, who learned a little bit too much from watching his older siblings. You see, Second Life apparently wanted to create a world of his own. The King of Light did not approve. What do you mean, Second Life? We've got 369 worlds at home. Why do you want a new world? What are you, ungrateful? So anyway, Second Life got punished for wanting this and was eventually forgiven. The 2 younger lives were not cowed by this, though. Third Life got the hint and didn't try to make his own world, and just sits around judging the souls of the dead and stuff. No, instead, he just told Fourth Life to make the world for him. Now, Fourth Life tried his best to make a world, but needed some help. So Third Life has to give him a bunch of his garments of life that he threw into the world to make something happen. He created this world then with an evil spirit named Ruha, who is the queen of the world of darkness. Being the queen of the world of darkness is a very spooky title. Or it's the name of an 80s zombie movie, which is probably even worse. Anyway, the material world has its downsides, as you have probably noticed. People get hungry and die, there is pain and disease and suffering, and sometimes you have an itch on your back that you can't reach to scratch, and you have to get someone else to scratch it, or buy one of those stupid back scratcher products that don't even work. It's just the worst. It wasn't all bad, though. Fourth Life created Adam with the help of the various planets, which is pretty cool, I guess. The planets sort of have their own spiritual power. They're beings that have spiritual agency, and they try to make Adam live, but all they can do is make him sneeze. So, Fourth Life and Third Life hatch a plan. Third Life grabs a handful of the mana from the King of Life and stuffs it into Adam, which immediately causes Adam to come to life. Which is great and all. Yay, we have life! But there is a problem. Now we have a whole bunch of souls from the Kingdom of Light, the spiritual realms of beauty and glory in the 369 worlds, who are instead stuck in this one. Note the similarities to the Sethians and the Valentinians. Once again, we have a system where the highest god creates a purely good and spiritual world, but one of the lesser spirits messes it all up by creating the material world. Souls get lost and stranded in that material world, and their salvation comes down to escaping it. Now, how do the Mandeans escape? I'm so glad you asked. Though if you remember who their number 1 prophet is, you can probably guess the answer. The answer is baptism in the Jordan. Well, not the actual Jordan River. Although, if you live near the Jordan River, then good for you, and you're good to go. But you aren't out of luck if you live in Kansas City. The Mandeans mean the Jordan in a more spiritual sense, you see. In fact, the Jordan River is primarily a spiritual thing. One of the things that came to be out of the primordial elements was what they call the heavenly Jordan, a sort of celestial river that flows through and illuminates the life of the heavens. The Jordan River, and all other rivers in the world, are copies of the celestial Jordan, and they are appropriate for baptisms. Baptisms have to be done with a priest present, but they do not have to be a one-time thing. Fun fact, John the Baptist might have offered multiple baptisms. There's no evidence his baptism of repentance was a one-time thing, We know the early church saw baptism as a one-time thing, but perhaps John the Baptist did not. We know a lot about the Mandeans' baptismal rituals because they have them all written down in a prayer book. As an Episcopalian, this is also a highly relatable thing to me. Now, Mandean baptisms have a lot of prayers that you say during them. We can't go through all of them. I mean, you have to wear a turban when you get baptized, and there are 3 prayers alone to say when you're putting on the turban. This is considered a sacred part of the baptism because when Third Life stole the manna to put in Adam, he wrapped it all up in his turban. Here is one of the prayers that you say, and I quote, "In the name of the great life, let there be light, let there be light, let there be the light of the great first life. There shone forth wisdom, vigilance, and praise of the first manna which came from its place. He who twineth the wreath is Euphen Euphathen. The bringer of the wreath is It Nisbat Utria. It Yarwar son of Nisbet Utria set on the wreath. He brought it and placed it upon the head of the implanted manamanas. The wreath flames, and the leaves of the wreath flame. Before the manna there is light, behind the manna glory, and at either side of the manna radiance, brilliance, and purity. And at the 4 corners of the house and the 7 sides of the firmament silence, bliss, and glory prevail, and life be praised." End quote. Now, don't worry yourself too much about the names of each of the entities invoked in this prayer. There's no quiz at the end of the podcast. Just notice what this is doing. The turban here is not linked with being spirited away from the heavens. It's linked with the soul being crowned with glory. It harkens back to the soul's life and light before the creation of the world, and to which the soul returns. Now, that prayer is already very cool. But then the believer gets into the water and the prayers go even harder. Here are a few. This is prayer number 15. And I quote, "Bound is the sea, bound are the 2 banks of the sea, bound are the devils and demons, the demon visitants, haunting spirits, and satanic amulet spirits. Bound are the 360 mysteries that are in the house. I am secured and sealed, I, Adam Yuohana, son of Manush, and these souls who are descending to the Jordan and will be sealed by the seal of the mighty sublime life, and by the great Ma, and the great Yah, and the great Baz, and by the great Aziz, and by the great Oz, and by the great Asin, and by the sea of Oz. Bound are Magian priests, slaughterers, priests who cut up victims, scorners, those who make evil signs, and the 7 mysteries which are in the sea. Every demon exorcised by name, every evil spirit by his appellation, every amulet spirit, and all idle demons who raise their heads and show their countenances, lifting themselves in pride against the sublime being, and directing their evil eye towards these souls who are going to the Jordan, shall be struck down and smitten by Yahya, and by Zasa, and by the angels which were sent and come against them. Flee in fear before them, and before the glory which is mighty upon them. Depart in fear, and avaunt. 7 walls of iron have been set around me, Adam Yohana, son of Hanush, with which Hayashum, the first Kushta, surrounded himself. And life is victorious." End quote. Now prayer number 16. And I quote, "I am a perfected gem. Into the midst of the worlds and ages am I cast down. I am an iron club, a great rocky crag. Any demon that dasheth himself against me will be shattered, and if I strike at him, he will be dashed to pieces. Any demon which reareth its head, any amulet imp which setteth its countenance against these souls in malice, overlooking them, will be thrashed and struck by Usfar Mon Harbiel Stalquus, the little child who dwelleth upon pure springs of light. Yea, beaten with the mace of water by which fire was beaten out and extinguished, and by the strength of Mon the healer, and by the strength of elect righteous men. And life is victorious." End quote. Notice the martial imagery in these prayers. The soul is set round with 7 walls of iron to protect it from demons and evil spirits, who will crash against them and fail, and also get beaten with a mace of water, which sounds either like something that would happen in a video game or a really great new power for them to give in the next Avatar: The Last Airbender spinoff. Man, a water mace sounds really cool. The Mandeans would totally be waterbenders. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, you may also notice the constant refrain throughout these prayers, and life is victorious. Mandeanism promises great hope for the baptized precisely because they are of the world of light. They can escape to the heavenly world because baptism links the soul to it. It protects the soul from the trickeries of evil spirits like Ruha, who want to seduce the soul and trap it in this material plane. Now, if you want to say these cool prayers, you have to be a Mandean priest. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Well, I guess you could say them on your own. Nobody's stopping you. I just did it. But in the Mandean system, this is all said by the priest. We know this because after each prayer, the Mandean prayer book gives instructions to tell you what to do when. It's a liturgical book. It cares not just about the words that are said, but the motions and clothing and artifacts that go along with them. Like, how many people are you baptizing? Well, the book gives you instructions for what to say if you're baptizing one person, and what to say if you're baptizing multiple people. Unfortunately, it lists the instructions after the text that you're supposed to say. Little bit of a logistical problem there. However, it does give us this beautiful prayer that really sums up the core of the Mandean philosophy. And I quote, "In the name of the life, I rose up from the Jordan, and I met a group of souls. A group of souls I met, who surrounded our father Shittil, saying to him, 'By thy life, our father Shittil, go with us to the Jordan.' If I go with you to the Jordan, who shall be our witness? Look, the sun hath risen above us, he will be our witness. It is not he whom I seek, not he whom my soul desireth. The sun of which ye spake riseth early, setteth at dusk. The sun of which ye spake, the sun is vanity and cometh to an end. Sun cometh to an end and becometh vanity, and his worshippers come to an end and are vanity. I rose up from the Jordan, and a group of souls I met. A group I met of souls who surrounded our father Shittil, saying to him, 'By thy life, our father Shittil, go with us to the Jordan.' If I go with you to the Jordan, who will be your witness? Look, the moon who shineth over us, he will be our witness. It is not he whom I seek, not he whom my soul desireth. The moon of whom ye spake riseth at dusk and setteth at dawn. The moon of which ye spake, the moon is vanity and cometh to an end, and his worshippers cometh to an end and are vanity. I rose up from the Jordan, and a group of souls I met. A group I met of souls who surrounded our father Shittil, saying to him, 'By thy life, our father Shittil, go with us to the Jordan.' If I go with you to the Jordan, who will be your witness? Look, there burns a fire. It will bear witness for us. That is not what I seek, not that which my soul desireth. The fire of which ye spake once a day needs a firebrand. The fire of which ye spake, fire is vanity and cometh to naught, and its worshippers come to naught and are vanity. I rose up from the Jordan, and a group of souls I met. I met a group of souls who surrounded our father Shittil, saying to him, 'By thy life, our father Shittil, go with us to the Jordan.' If I go with you to the Jordan, who will be your witness? The Jordan and its two banks will bear witness for us. Pita, Kushta, and Mambuha will bear witness for us. Habshaba and Kanadizidqua will bear witness for us. The sanctuary in which we worship will bear witness for us. The alms that are in our laps will bear witness for us, and our Father, who is our head, will bear witness for us. This is what I seek. This is that which my soul desireth. When I rise to the house of life and travel to the everlasting abode, when life questioneth me, these witnesses will come and bear witness. Witnesses of the truth are they, sure is all they say, and life is victorious." End quote. I haven't translated all of the Mandean words above because, once again, there will be no quiz. But notice the repetition in this poetry and the themes it emphasizes. Nothing in the material world, not the sun, not the moon, not fire, Nothing at all will satisfy the believer's longing. However, the river, the celestial entities, the worship itself, that satisfies the believer. That is everything they want. Baptism is the central element of Mandean life, and in that respect, it's not much different from Christianity. Some scholars have noted that Mandeanism's emphasis on sacramental rites, like baptism, distinguishes it from other so-called Gnostic sects. The idea is basically that Sethians and Valentinians and the rest think that gnosis alone can save you. The Mandeans insist that it's not quite that simple. Knowledge is nice and all, but it takes more than that to escape the material world. You need the link with heaven that baptism establishes. Now, I am not so sure that distinction quite holds. At least some other Gnostic groups also have important rituals. Think of the Valentinians and their ritual of spiritual marriage. We don't necessarily call that a sacrament, but it fulfills the same function in the system. Most religious systems have a ritual component. That's as true of those systems we call Gnostic as it is of any other. The relative emphasis will be different depending on the religion, of course, but the component is there either way. Anyway, that was an aside. There are other neat things that happen after you're baptized. You get a gift of oil, bread, and water. I like to think the oil is a consolation prize for not even getting Welch's grape juice instead of water. A handshake and a holy kiss. And then finally, the priest blesses you by putting his right hand on your head. Now, there is more to the Mandeans than their baptismal ritual. They have another important ritual they perform for those who die without being cleansed appropriately, called the Maskita. If the ritual isn't done within 3 days, then the soul will get stuck in the earth and take a really long time to get into those 369 heavens. Obviously, we don't want that, so the ritual is super duper important. It is also really, really long. It has to be done by 3 priests, and it is only done on Sundays. Which makes me wonder what happens if you die uncleansed on, say, a Monday or a Tuesday. There are also about 18 billion different kinds of mosquito depending on what the state of your uncleanliness was. There's one for if you died without putting on the white robe you're supposed to wear. There's another if you died during childbirth, and still another if you died by drowning or fire. There's even one if you died on a particular day when religious ceremonies are forbidden. Maybe that's how they get around timing issues. You just say the right mosquito a little bit later and it still counts. You can also say a mosquito for someone who isn't dead. It is ultimately a cleansing ritual, and so it's done not just for the dead, although it's extra important for them. Logistics questions aside, as I said, the mosquito is really long. But there are a bunch of cool prayers in it, so while we don't have time to go through the whole thing, I do want to share some of them with you. We have some prayers of praise like the following, and I quote, "Thy name, O life, is excellent. Its glory is great, its light abundant. Its goodness came over, inaugurating the first mystery, life which proceeded from life, and truth which existed before the beginning. This is a wellspring of life which sprang forth from the place of life. We drink thereof, of this fount of life, which life transmitted and was established in the house of life, which crossed worlds, came, cleft the heavens, and was revealed. Thou hast shown us that which the eye of man hath not seen, and caused us to hear that which human ear has not heard. Thou hast freed us from death and united us with life, released us from darkness and united us with light, led us out of evil and joined us to good. Thou hast shown us the way of life, and hast guided our feet into the ways of truth and faith, so that life cometh, and expelleth darkness, and goodness cometh, and casteth out evil. Like the mingling of wine with water, so may thy truth, thy righteousness, and thy faith be added to those who love thy name of truth, and life be praised." End quote. I'm fascinated by this praise because, well, there's so much of it that wouldn't be out of place in a Christian baptismal service today. Obviously, you have some of the celebrations of the Mandean mysteries of the cosmos, but all of the language about moving from the way of death to the way of life, from darkness to light, evil to good, That's all straight out of a common baptismal tradition that John and Jesus shared. However, there is more to this Mesquita than just that. We also get some longer bits that don't seem to be so much about praise as about teaching the soul what to expect upon death. For example, now, before I begin, be aware this is a longer quote and there are a lot of names in it. Once again, there will be no quiz. Don't worry too much about the names. Just try to focus on what this is telling the practitioner. And I quote, "When any human being departeth from his body, there come towards him 7 godlike appearances, and each standeth by his own, and Soriel the releaser cometh, he who releaseth spirit and soul from the body. Up there, with those works, he standeth with the vesture of Uzatak Manda Dehia, which releaseth the soul. And Hararan and Karkawan Ziwa remove from her that in her which is of the body. And she putteth on the dress of Uzatak Manda Dehia. Garment on garment she putteth on, she arrayeth herself in robe after robe. When she weareth the vesture of Uzatak Manda Dehia there, she laugheth, rejoiceth, leapeth for joy, danceth, exulteth, and is overjoyed about the glorious splendor resting upon her, and the glory that accrueth to her. Onward she goeth in the vesture of Uzatak Manda Dehia. The planets who are in their places were out of countenance on seeing it. They clenched their fists, beat on the forecourt of their breasts, and say, Woe on us planets, for we are powerless, but the works of their hands are victorious. And they say, How beautiful is this radiancy, how steadfast this light, how lovely this glory, and how wondrous this appearance. And they ask, Who will clothe us with this radiance? Who will cover us with this light, and who will shed on us this glory? And what is it that passeth before us in this guise? For it is fair, shining, and bright. In this world nothing made can be compared to it. And they exclaim, How good is Kushta to the good, and Manda Dehia to all his chosen, those who stand in their bodies and dedicate themselves to the name of life and to becoming like this. The soul goes on in the vesture of Uzatak Manda Dehia, and they let those deeds of hers pass by and escape the hands of all the planets. And on she went and reached Abathor's house of detention, Abathor, the ancient, lofty, holy, and guarded one. There his scales are set up, and spirits and souls are questioned before him as to their names, their signs, their blessing, their baptism, and everything that is therewith. The soul of so-and-so, whoever the name of the person who just died is, hath entered the house of Abathor, and hath given her name, her sign, her blessing, her baptism, and everything that is therewith. The souls of our fathers were signed with the sign of life, and the name of life, and the name of Manda Dehia was pronounced over them. They put them in the scales, putting in their deeds and rewards, and weighed them. And the perfect went in also, the spirit with the soul, but they took them out, for they were clean. Radiance issued from the radiance of Abathor, and clothed them, and they brought light and covered therewith. Like them, the soul put on garment and robe over robe like the vestments of Abathor. There she laugheth, rejoiceth, leapeth for joy, danceth, exulteth, and is overjoyed about the glorious splendor which resteth on her and accrueth to her. And she proceedeth in the vesture of Uzatak Manda Dehia, and went on and reacheth the watch house of 4 beings, sons of perfection, Inhai, Sumhai, Zivhai, and Nurhai. Each of these beings clotheth her with his radiance, and each covereth her with his light. Garment on garment she putteth on, with garment after garment doth she clothe herself. When she puts on the vesture of the sons of perfection, she laugheth, rejoiceth, leapeth for joy, danceth, exulteth, and is overjoyed about the glorious splendor, the honor resting on her and belonging to her." End quote. So obviously there was a lot there. Once again, I just want to point out a couple of bits of key theology here. First of all, it's hard not to get swept up in the poetry of this. Mandeans really love their refrains. And in this moment of reminding the soul what is to happen at death, the refrain is laugheth, rejoiceth, leapeth for joy, danceth, exulteth, and is overjoyed. about the glorious splendor, the honor resting on and belonging to her. It talks about death as something that brings joy, not necessarily simply because of separation from the body, although that seems nice. Interesting, isn't it, that once the soul is freed of its bodily clothing, if you will, the story talks mostly about the soul putting on more clothing, layers and layers of honor and glory, each spiritual being giving the soul a gift, a garment, almost like a prize for having endured to the end and escaped. Speaking of that escape, you probably also noticed that the planets all of a sudden have a lot to say. This is a bit of the Mandean cosmology that I was going to tell you above, but then I cut it for time because I thought this episode was going to be too long, but it turns out it's not, so I'm going to tell you now. Long story short, the planets are each spiritual entities. Every single planet in the solar system is like this, and they are basically in league with Ruha, that nasty 80s metal demon queen that I told you about earlier. The idea is that in this Mandean cosmology, the planets are at a lower level than the heavens as a whole. The planets are part of, if you like, the earthly sphere. They're just at the higher levels of it. And the goal of Ruha and the planets, which coincidentally would be an above-average band name, is to trick souls and capture them so that they can't get out and get to heaven. What's happening in this story is that when the Mandean soul ascends, the planets are unable to deceive her and stop that ascent. So you get this very interesting sci-fi moment of the planets weeping and gnashing their teeth. Oh man, she's so cool! That soul is so cool! She's so pretty! She's so happy! I could never be that cool! Honestly, kind of sounds like the way people talk about their high school crushes. In Simeon's Wake, now brought to you by Teenage Angst. Above all, though, the important thing to remember is that this is meant to teach the soul what to expect, but also to teach the soul not to fear death, or at least that even if the soul feels some fear, there really isn't anything to merit that fear. That what waits for the soul after death is life, perfection, happiness, and bliss. That's at the core, I think, of the Mosquito. The soul is cleansed as much from anxiety as anything else. Baptism and Mosquito are the two major rituals of the Mandeans. They have other minor rites that can be performed without a priest, but those two are the essential ones. They kept generations of believers in the faith and comfort of this tradition, even to the present day. Because unlike the Sethians and the Valentinians, the Mandeans are still performing their rituals. They remain alive and practicing today. There are about 60 to 70,000 of them worldwide, but their future is uncertain. Almost all the Mandeans lived in Iraq prior to the United States invasion in 2003. In the turmoil and upheaval, many Mandeans chose to flee the country. Our best estimate suggests there are at most 5,000 Mandeans remaining in Iraq. Most of them fled and resettled in the neighboring countries, Syria, Iran, and Jordan. Even in exile, they honor their faith. They live near rivers and practice their ancient rites. They honor the scriptures of their people. And even in the face of tragedy and displacement, they continue to proclaim that life is victorious. No matter what their disagreements with the followers of Jesus, that is something on which they can all agree. A powerful antiphon to sing along all of Simeon's Wake. Thank you for listening to In Simeon's Wake, part of the Earth and Altar Podcast Network. If you liked the episode, please leave it a review and drop a like on that episode at your earliest convenience, or even before. It's nice. If you'd like to support this work, head on over to patreon.com/Ben Wyatt. That's patreon.com/Ben Wyatt, WYATT. Until next time, stay curious.